One of my favorite things to do is try and look at things perhaps in the Torah and kind of reevaluate them, and things that we often take for granted, perhaps we can look at a little bit differently and provide it with a little bit more meaning. The first thing that I need you to do is actually rip off the front page of your packet because there's a mistake, and just rip off the first page. We'll be using the second page, and we'll be using the chumashim on your table. You need more copies? By the way, it's amazing. Front row table is always empty. In shul, I don't know why they can have front row. But here you go. You need more copies. I thought only men sit in the back row, but I guess not. Okay, that's point number one. Before we open up the Torah, I want to ask you a very simple question. And my question that I would like to ask is as follows. Why is it, out of the 613 commandments in the Torah, why did God choose, in His infinite wisdom, to include the Aseret HaDibrot the way they are? What better way to prepare for Shavuot, which is in 2 weeks today, than try to reevaluate exactly what the Aseret HaDibrot are? First of all, let's try to get a translation. If you had to translate the Aseret HaDibrot in English, how would you translate them? Okay, very good. So already the first conundrum that we have is colloquially we know them as the 10 Commandments, thanks to Hollywood, right? And the truth is, there is no Jewish source that exists anywhere that ever refers to the 10 Commandments as 10 Commandments. It is completely a Christian, fictitious creation, and they did it with a very specific intent. What was their intent? What did they want to demonstrate? They wanted to get rid of 603. So if they reconstruct and say, wait a second, these 10 are the only ones that matter. These are the 10 commandments. Then, by the way, they can say the rest don't matter. Like kashrut, brit milah. And they could almost repackage Christianity to be the authentic Judaism. After all, we keep the 10 Commandments. This is so vital from a historical perspective that just give me 30 seconds to touch on it. Here we go, in source, again, looking at the second page only, source number 7. In source number 7, just from a historical context, believe it or not, the Aseret HaDibrot were actually recited every day in shul, every day in the Beit HaMikdash as part of davening, and in shuls across Israel during the Second Temple. But take a look at source 7. The Gemara says, Korin HaAseret HaDibrot Shema Vayayim Shamoa Vayomer Emet V'Yatziv Avodah B'Kat Konim. Source 7 tells us this is the order of what they used to do in the Beit HaMikdash. This was the order of prayer in the temple, which was mimicked in the local shuls in the 1st century and before that in Israel. However, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Af B'Gvulim Bikshu Likro Kain. They wanted to replicate this, not just in the temple, but also in the border towns, basically the cities outside Jerusalem. But the Ela Shekfar Bitlum was already canceled. Where was it canceled? Already, ladies, during the time, towards the end of the Second Temple period, they stopped reciting the Aseret HaDibros in the Beit HaMikdash as part of their daily morning service. Why? Mipnei tar omes haminim. Says the Gemara, second page, second folio in Brachos, that they stopped saying the 10 Commandments in shul in the temple every day. Why? Taros haminim. Says Rashi, which you don't have in front of you, and it's alluded to by all the scholars, because of the early Christians. So we even see that this caused almost a ruckus, that the rabbis realized, you know what, we can't highlight these 10 commandments anymore because they're being misinterpreted, misunderstood. And they were removed. But if you take a look, I think even in your Art Scroll Siddur, At the end, you'll even see a copy of the Aseret Dibros at the end. Again, why? Because it used to be part of davening. And they have a little asterisk there too, explaining the historical context. Okay. So let's go back to our original question. If it's not 10 commandments, because we see how much trouble it will cause us if we call them 10 commandments, in fact, most of the Rishonim, most of the medieval commentators who try and pin down the 613 commandments, because that's our tradition, say there's about 17 or 18 embedded in the Aseret Dibros, right? So there's way more than 10. Everyone agrees to that. So we're no longer, from this point on, going to refer to them as the 10 Commandments, because that's a very, almost, it's fictitious, it's simply not true, and after all, it's not Jewish, it's Christian. So we're going to call them the Aseret Dibros. So if that's the case, why did God choose these Aseret Dibros? Because what's a Dibra? A Dibra is it's a statement, right? How many people here at the end of the Pesach Seder recite Who Knows One in Hebrew? Raise your hand if you recite it in Hebrew. Does anyone recite it in English? Who knows one? No? Yeah? Some people recite it in English? Good, great. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. In English only, who knows two? I know two. Two are let's stick to English, right? Two are the tablets that Moshe brought, right? What, is Moshe like a pharmacist? He's like dispensing tablets. Here's 2 aspirins for everybody today. What's going on here? The English is very peculiar. The English says 2 are the tablets that Moshe brought. What are you talking about? He's like dispensing medicine to the people. Maybe they had a headache from all the noise. I'm not so sure, right? But the Hebrew is beautiful. What's the language in Hebrew? Shnei Luchot Habrit. That is not the same. What does Shnei Luchot Habrit mean? 2 are the Luchot are tablets. Now what's Brit? The covenant. The Hebrew gets it. The English muffs it up. So we already see that in Hebrew, clearly how Chazal understood it. These are not just any 2 tablets, but they are covenantal tablets. I would like to even refer to them as it's the ketubah. There's a wedding that goes on in Har Sinai between God and the Jewish people. The Jewish people agree to marry God. Moshe, I say, is like the shadchan. He runs up and down the mountain, right? If you had more time, we'd see those psukim inside. If you wanted to take a look later on in chapter 19 in Shmos, where God has a proposal, Moshe goes down, negotiation, they agree, and the wedding is on. Now, when we talk about that these tablets are covenantal, I want to just spend a few moments and talk about what's a covenant. Right? So if a person is wearing a wedding ring, I don't wear wedding rings, but a person has a wedding ring, right? Question. What's the purpose of a wedding ring? What's its purpose? What's it there for?
Public affirmation.
Public affirmation. Now, if a person loses the wedding ring, are they still married?
Yes.
So what is the wedding ring? What's a wedding ring? It's a symbol. It's a reminder for yourself, for others. Right? If there's a relationship, if there's a marriage, there's a relationship even between a parent and a child, God and the Jewish people, we need songs. We live here human beings. We need reminders. I'll give you another example. The rainbow. Is the rainbow, which we're all familiar with, comes in the aftermath of what incident in the Torah? The flood. In the times of Noah. And what happens? So God has, why? There's a bris. Now, here's very important. Is the covenant the rainbow? No! There's no such thing as, the wedding ring isn't the marriage, it's a symbol. The rainbow is a reminder. It's an os bris. It's a reminder of a covenant. Here's a mistake that many people make. A bris milah. Is the covenant circumcision? Of course not. Because the covenant is between God and the entire Jewish people, not just men. But men, as many of you know, need a reminder more often than women. Right? So a bris milah, circumcision, is a reminder. You can never make a covenant. A relationship can never be brought down to anything physical. Not a wedding, not a marriage. We know that. Right? You have these charms, these like my daughter, like best friends forever, right? So it's a reminder, it's shtick. But a relationship is way more than anything physical. Therefore, when we call the Aseres HaDibros, they are luchos habris, they're a reminder of a covenant. But what happens? You have a few options. If a covenant goes sour, what can you do? You can break them, can't you? So when Moshe smashes the luchos the first time, what effectively is he saying? I got to break the covenant. I got to hit the reset button. It's just not working. So you have two options when you want to hit a reset, when things aren't working. You can either break up, which happens, or can it work on your relationship? That's exactly what in the end happens with God and the Jewish people. We say, you know what? It's broken. We're going to rebuild. The relationship's not over. We'll fix it. Change the relationship a little bit. Work on the relationship a little bit. That's what happens. Now, if all that is true, we have to ask ourselves a very fundamental question. How in the world do these 10 statements teach us? How do they help us demonstrate that there's this relationship with God and the Jewish people? What's it based on? Because remember, if I were to put you all in a room and lock the doors and say, okay, ladies, we need to come up with 10 statements, right, about Judaism. And I'd leave you and I'd come back an hour later. Of course, you would all agree nicely, of course, right? I would guarantee you none of you would include 80% of the things on that list. It just doesn't make sense. If you can't, take a look, please, for a minute. Open up the Chumashim in front of you. Again, I apologize. We had a little bit of I sent the wrong file to YU to print for today. Open up chapter 20, please, in the Chumashim in front of you in Shemot. I'm actually going to grab a copy myself. By the way, the Aseres HaDibros are repeated, right? They're repeated twice. They're repeated once in Shemos, in Yisro. They're repeated later on the end of Torah and then in Parshas Veschanan. Again, why? Because there's a reaffirmation of the covenant before the Jewish people enter the land of Israel. We'll look at it the first time. There are a couple of minor differences. Okay, chapter 20. We are looking in chapter 20. The truth is, it's already the second verse. But if you go to most shuls, we're not really in a shul room right now, but in Aron Kodesh, many of the parochets on an Aron will depict, usually a very brief summary, of their Aseres HaDibros. Sometimes even on a Sefer Torah itself, one of the default mantles that you can purchase, actually, a lot of them have it on there. But I should just mention, what did the top look like? Yes, it didn't look like a McDonald's arch, I don't think. Hard to imagine that the top of the luchos looked like the McDonald's arch. I find that hard to believe. Most historians actually say that it was a square, right? It was a rectangle. Michelangelo said, that's not really artistically appealing, so he kind of added a McDonald's arch on the top of it. And unfortunately, we've kind of adopted that in many cases. Although, where did I just read that one organization just switched their logo? I just read that somewhere. After tremendous pressure, who was it? I don't remember anymore. But anyways, I think our shul, if I'm not mistaken, our shul does both. Our shul in the main sanctuary upstairs, it has like a rectangle, two rectangles, and like behind it in another piece of marble, whatever that is like a bit of the arch. I don't know. Maybe both opinions. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. So here we go. Let's take a look. What is the first dibra? What is the first statement? Anochi Hashem Elokecha. By the way, it's not even a commandment, is it? I am Hashem your God. This is a well-known argument in the commentaries what exactly this means. We are not going to deal with it right now. First one is Anochi, I am Hashem your God. Okay, if I was coming up maybe with like a top 10 list, I consider that, but that's like pretty fundamental. Okay, flip the page. What is number 2? So it's a bit of a, I told you to flip the page and I really shouldn't have. The next one is actually, the next verse is Lo Yelacha, right? Don't have any other foreign gods, right? That's in the, later on in that verse. The first one is I'm Hashem your God. 2, don't even have the God. You're coming up with 10. That's a little redundant. You know what I mean? That's pretty redundant, right? The first one is, I'm Hashem your God. And the second one is, don't have any other gods. Come on, where's your creativity? Like, you want to incorporate many different concepts of Judaism, you're kind of repeating yourself a couple times. What's number 3? Number 3 is actually in verse 6. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry, it's verse 7. It's Lo Tisa et Shem Hashem Elokecha Lashav. Don't swear falsely in God's name. Are you kidding me? That is such an important precept. Don't swear falsely in God's name. I guarantee you, if I were to lock you all up in a room and come up with top 10 things, there's no way you'd have written that one. Okay, number 4. Number 4, I think we all get it. And that is, of course, number 4 is Shabbos. Okay, I think we would have definitely agreed to that one. Number 5, especially on Mother's Day, that's a very important one. Right? And that is, of course, honor your mother and father. That's great. Number 6 is, we're jumping all the way to verse 13. Again, we're in chapter 20 in Exodus, verse 13. What is that? Lo tirtzach. What's lo tirtzach? Be very careful with this one. Don't murder. Very good. You're allowed to kill. The King James Version of the Bible, when they translated it in English, said don't kill. We know what that led to. You're allowed to kill in Judaism. Sometimes anyways, right? Self-defense. So, you're never allowed to murder. What is murder? Unethical killing. When is it considered murder? When is it killing? That's why we have the Talmud. Next. Lo tinaf. What's lo tinaf? Tinaf is do not commit adultery. Okay? I get that one. That's pretty important. Next one. Lo tignov. Now, lo tignov, you have written down there a translation, at least the version that I'm using this in Sino. Lo tignov is translated as don't steal. But the rabbis did not understand it to be don't steal. They understood it to mean don't kidnap. Okay, don't steal is mentioned somewhere else. Here it means don't kidnap. All right, like kidnapping is not one of the common things they do on the weekend, but is it, would it make, let's say, my top 10 list? Maybe. The first, murder, I get. Adultery, I get. Kidnapping, don't get me wrong, I'm not encouraging kidnapping, right? But I don't know if it necessarily make this top 10 list. Let's go on. Lo ta'ana vereacha ed shakir. Do not what? Do not bear false witnesses. Do not testify falsely against your neighbor. Really? Really? By the way, any mention of kashrut here? Nothing. Pesach? Nothing. Kosher? Brit Milah? Tefillin? Nothing. But it says, don't swear falsely against your neighbor. What's going on here? This is the great covenantal top 10 list that God chose to give the people. Very strange. Just to continue, our last one, lo tachmod, which means do not covet. Right? Don't be jealous. Again, jealousy is definitely not encouraged. But would that be something that you would choose for your top 10 list? So we have to really understand what's going on here. Right? Why these 10? Why only these 10? There's something here that clearly we're fundamentally missing. So here we go. Now we're just starting. Everything was introduction. All right. In 15 minutes that I have left, we're going to hopefully leave with some type of insight. We'll see what we can do. Okay. There's a famous way to break down these 10. The first 5 and the second 5. Right? What's the common denominator with the first 5, ladies? Ben Adam. Very good. That's what we were all taught, and now we have to erase what we were taught and think. Right? That's a problem sometimes, that we're taught things without thinking. We need to think. And the reason is, ladies, that it can't be between a human being and God, because what's the 5th commandment? What's the 5th statement? Now, I like to think I'm God, right? Right? That doesn't usually go over so well in my house. I'm barely a father in my house. Forget God. So let's re-examine the first five. Because if the fifth one is kabed et avicha v'yetimecha, and a parent is not God, how would you redefine number five? And have it fit with the previous four? It's between you and what's a common denominator with your parents and God? Excellent. Very good. The Talmud actually tells us, I brought it down, it's actually source number 10, and it says what? Why is kibud avim so important? Because there are three people that brought you into this world. Mom, Dad, and God. So let's redefine the first five, and we're no longer going to call them between us and God, being Adam l'makom, because I don't believe that's correct. It's amazing. We're taught something, and everyone just accepts it. Right? You can't accept things sometimes. It's not good to accept things. I mean, sometimes, but you have to, think a little bit. So the first five I would like to redefine as between us and our creators. Wonderful. Now, the last five are between, everyone's afraid to speak now, right? What's the last five? Between you and your fellow mankind, humankind, right? I think that works out very well. Begins with don't murder and ends with don't covet. Wonderful. Now here's something fascinating. If I were to, and again, the handout sheet, I think depicted this very nicely. I'm kind of missing it here, but help me here with a visual. Those of you that are visual learners are going to have a harder time with this concept, so I'll try to kind of portray it for you. And as if I were to write out the first five on the right side and the second five on the left side, right? I want to actually argue there's a parallels between them. Let's go through. The first statement is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem your God. What is the sixth one? Meaning, what's the first one? What's the first one between you and fellow human beings are? Don't murder. Don't murder, right? How are they connected? What's the greatest rebellion that you can do against a human being? Murder them. What's the greatest rebellion you could do? You can't murder God. What could you do instead? Not recognize Anochi Hashem Elokecha. They're connected. If I don't recognize that I am Hashem your God, so to some extent that is the greatest rebellion that you can do. Now here's something which is also very important. Why can't I murder? This person annoyed me. He cut me off on Bathurst Street. It was a 416 driver, right? They cut me off on Bathurst. Why can't I murder them? Answer? Because God created them. What does it say? It says, Shofech dam adam, badam damo yishafech ki betzelem elokim barat adam. Why can't you murder? Because human beings are created in the image of God. First and sixth are parallel. They're connected to each other. What about 2 and 7? 2 and 7. So number 2 is Lo yelach elokim achim al panai, don't think that's foreign gods, and Lo tinaf, adultery. What's the connection? Sorry? Very good, not being faithful. Number 7 is not being faithful towards whom? The closest relationship that a person can have is between a husband and wife. Failure to recognize that covenantal relationship is called adultery, lo tinaf. And how is that paralleled? Having a foreign god. It's called moonlighting. One is rebellion against your creator, God. One's rebellion against fellow human beings, lo tinaf. Great. Number 3 and 7. This gets a little harder. First 2 are easy. Number 3. What is number 3? Excuse me. Number 3 is lo tisa, false. Don't take my name in vain, and don't kidnap. If I kidnap somebody, what essentially am I saying? If I kidnap you, what am I doing to you? I'm taking away your freedom, but what else am I doing besides removing one's freedom when I kidnap somebody? I'm essentially saying, what are they? They're not human, they're a commodity. They can be bought and they can be sold, they can be traded. Like gold. I can take gold and I can sell it. And by kidnapping, I'm effectively doing the exact same thing. I don't recognize you as a person. I view you as a commodity. And I buy you and I sell you as I please. If I swear falsely in God's name, what essentially am I doing? Now here's something very important. When you, God's name doesn't mean, let's define God's name for a second. It's worthwhile. God has only one name, ladies. What's the name of God? Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei. Every other name of God that we find in the Torah is not the proper name. It's an adjective describing one of God's characteristics. Because if it's God's name, that's called idolatry, because there's more than one God. God has only one proper name. Everything else is an adjective describing one of God's characteristics. That is fundamental in the Torah. Right? Now, when people make a name for yourself, young man, go out in the world and what does it mean, make a name for yourself? What's a name? A reputation. Reputation. When we say, it's going back a few years, but the principal gets on the bus and warns all the kids, don't make a Hillel Hashem. What does that mean? You represent God. Hillel Hashem means desecrating God's name. What does that mean? You're desecrating God's reputation. Because what are people going to say? See that Jewish school, that Jewish camp, the Jewish organization? Look at the way they behave. So our job is to do PR for God. We have been hired by the greatest PR person in the world. His name is God. He's hired the Jewish people because God is not very good at PR because God is not part of this world. So he's hired us, the Jewish people, to accomplish and to basically run his PR firm. So the Jewish people do a very bad job. It doesn't reflect very well on our boss, does it? It's a Chil Hashem. But on the other hand, if we're doing a very good job, we're sanctifying God's name. We're sanctifying God's reputation. So if I go around and I swear falsely in God's name and God's reputation, what essentially am I doing to God? I'm commoditizing him as well. Nothing special, unique about God. I can use it and abuse it as I please. So it's a rebellion against my Creator in how I'm I'm not saying that sanctifying God's name is important, his reputation is important. It means nothing to me. I can misuse it. His name, God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, has no relevance, no meaning towards it. I can use it as I please in a mundane manner. The next combination is Shabbos and swearing falsely. Here we go. If I swear falsely, so let's use an example. George, I swear falsely in court that I say, George murdered. How do I know? I was there, I saw it. I'm a false witness. By me, how is that a rebellion? What way am I rebelling against George? What am I saying about George? If I testify falsely against him, what am I saying? That I don't recognize. George's actions are false. What George accomplishes or doesn't accomplish, it's not up to George, it's up to me. I can manipulate what George does or didn't do. He murdered. He did murder. I'm saying he murdered. His accomplishments are not his accomplishments. Or I'm recreating fictitiously what he's done. That's what happens when I swear falsely against a human being. Now, a rebellion against my Creator. What is one of the greatest things that God did? Well, he created the entire world. If you don't keep Shabbos, what are you failing to recognize? That one of God's actions, one of the things that he did, has no meaning or purpose. A person who does not keep Shabbos, the rabbis tell us, doesn't recognize God created the whole world. Right? For 6 days, God did not create on Shabbos. Therefore, we do not create on Shabbos, thereby recognizing that God is the ultimate creator. That's why the 39 malachos, ladies, that we do are all about creative acts. You're allowed to, Uncle Moshe, by the way, Uncle Moshe's wrong. You're allowed to work on Saturday. For double, triple pay, right? Anyone here in science? We know that. But what's the definition of work? Anyone here? Physics? Physics? Anybody? Physics? Right? What's the definition of work? How do you measure work? Joules per second? Oh, come on, people. Yes. Say yes. Right? Okay, good. Right? So imagine my mother says, I got to be very careful. My mother asks me and says, you mind sweeping the floor? Sorry, I'll go my she says, ain't going to work on Saturday. You can't set a table. That's work. It's measured in joules, producing energy. But you're allowed to work on Saturday. You cannot be creative on Shabbos. And is defined as the 39 creative acts that are used in the Mishkan. So again, testifying falsely essentially says, I don't recognize this human being's acts, creations, behaviors are significant. I can manipulate them. And I'm rebelling against God as a creator by recognizing that He didn't create the world. I don't keep Shabbos. What about the last one? The last one is as follows. The fifth one is not honoring my parents and coveting. Here's a connection. If I covet your wife, your house, your children, your slave, and your 3 sports cars, what essentially am I saying? I don't want to be me. I want to be him. Right? Lo tachmod. If I want that person's wife and their house and their cars and their children, if I'm not happy with who I am and what I am, who's that a rebellion against? My parents. My parents who brought me into this world. I don't want to be me. I want to be that guy in that guy's life with that guy's wife. So essentially what we've seen here is that we see that there's parallels on the 2 sides of the tablets. The 2 sides of the luchos. Again, Moshe is not a pharmacist. What Moshe is doing, he's giving the Jewish people something which is covenantal. It's covenantal because it teaches a few concepts that are very fundamental. And what are they? To some extent, it shows you that there's a parallel between how you treat your creators and how you treat fellow human beings. That, ladies, is absolutely unique, especially in the ancient world. Number 2, they all come down, I think, to one idea. And that is, remember, you are working for the boss. You're working for God. If you don't have Anochi Hashem, then nothing else makes sense. If you recognize and appreciate who you are and what you are and why you are here, how you're supposed to treat others, and recognize we are put on this earth to represent God, that is the covenant. That's the luchos. That's what they're all about. To some extent, and even Rav Sadia Gaon in his commentary, in fact, argues this, that everything else in the Torah is a subset of those 10. Because there's something about those 10. It's not about necessarily the most important, but there's an idea here that's extremely valuable. I'll even touch on the last one. Don't covet. Don't be jealous. Well, what about kashrus? What about matzah? The Ibn Ezra has a tremendous insight. And he says, you know what the purpose of the entire Torah is? One of the purposes of the entire Torah is to transform you into appreciating exactly what you have and who you are. And yes, that is very important. We need to be able to control our mind and our hearts and our thoughts and improve on them. That's one of the purposes of the mitzvahs of the Torah and why we are and who we are and what we are here to do. So when we take a look at what is really fundamental, what is this covenant? Because that's what the luchos are. They are covenantal. It reminds us and instills in us these values of how we view our creators and how we view others. How we appreciate ourselves and who we are and what we are. How we view the world around us. It's a world that we cannot abuse, we don't take advantage of other people. But it's one that ultimately looks inside each and every one of us and says, I recognize that you have a spark of godliness in you. And that is why I treat you the way you are, and that is why I value who I am. And that is why I think these 10 are looked upon as the 10 covenantal statements that ultimately God forged the covenant, the bris, with God and the Jewish people. And these are the 10 which, at one point in time, were said during davening, if not for the Christians. And these are the 10 that I really think we have definitely a sense of significance and meaning and purpose, and why they play such an important role in Jewish life and Judaism, and why they're plastered in so many different places in our shuls or our schools but more importantly, in our hearts and in our homes. Have a wonderful, happy Mother's Day to everyone, and have a wonderful Yom Yerushalayim next Sunday, and then followed by the wonderful holiday of Shavuot, of Chag Matan Toratenu. Thank you.